Okay, so some of you may not know what Unplugged Canada is all about. Essentially, it's a non-for-profit that is here to safeguard the children's mental health. Our mission is to advocate for children. We want them to have a smartphone-free childhood. We're into free range childhood. We want kids to play in the outdoors. We want them to be healthy. And we feel the only way they have a chance to do that is to stay away from smartphones until until at least the age of 14. And what Unplugged Canada, the goal here is to sign an online pledge where parents actually commit to that. Our other big goal is to raise awareness about the impact. It is actually quite, I mean, if you're on this webinar, you already probably know the dangers of smartphones, but we also hear from a ton of parents who are still quite oblivious to this because while the research has been there, it's really not been at the forefront until the last couple of years. So we're excited it's finally coming to the forefront. But I have to say that still many parents are unaware of this. So we feel the research is clear. We know that excessive screen time, particularly early screen time, can impair cognitive development. The content they're exposed to at a young age is really onerous to brain development. It can lead to social isolation as well as emotional detachment. We know how devices can create addictions in our children's brains, not to mention the cyberbullying that happens and so much more. So we feel the data is in, and we need to really stop this experiment that has happened with our children. We have a great keynote speaker today, Tanya Johnson, and she's really going to dive into some of the impact that smartphones have. So I'm not going to get into this too deeply right now. So our goal is to reach as many like-minded parents across Canada as possible. We want them to join this movement and have them sign our pledge. We want to spread awareness through research-backed evidence so that people understand how important it is to have balance in this digitized world we live. Like, we all need to take ownership of digital citizenship and truly understand what that means. So it's really time to act so that we can save our children and put an end to this trend that we have where we're replacing a child-based, a free free child play, and we're replacing that with like a smartphone childhood, and that needs to stop. So we would love for you to join us in taking this pledge. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about this. So what is the pledge? So the pledge is in fact an online declaration that says that you're going to keep your children off of smartphones. The reason why we want people to take the pledge is because we feel there is strength in numbers. This provides community for parents. The more people we have this to sign the pledge, the more parents are going to feel empowered to also sign it. Some people say to us, well, why, like, I have the awareness, I'm just not going to give them a smartphone, and say, why do I need to sign the pledge? The pledge gives us information. It gives us data. It tells us how much progress we're making. And I can't tell other parents, well, yeah, I've been told by, 300 other parents that they're not going to do this. When we can say that we have these numbers, it gives other parents confidence and gives them the impetus to sign the pledge themselves because they know they're not in it alone. The only way we're going to win this battle to shift culture is if we stick together, and signing the pledge, giving us that collective commitment, and then being accountable for that is what's really going to make a difference. So our progress, as Jenny mentioned, our launch event was in September. We now have over 950 families who have signed it across Canada, and we're just getting started. So please, this is an important aspect of that because it provides us data, which we need. So please, if you can, take the pledge and help this cause. So the way the pledge works, I mean, it can easily be found on the website. It probably takes about 2 minutes to do it. When we have 5 pledges from the same grade of that same school, the pledge becomes what we call active. And all this means is that we share information, if you give us permission to, of those parents in that same grade so that you can create community with them. This allows you to have play dates and be confident if they're going to have a play date, there's probably not going to be much technology attached to that play date. We don't want parents to feel isolated. You can opt out of sharing the information, but we encourage it just because it does enable community. If the pledge is not active, it doesn't mean that it's not a legitimate pledge. It just means that we're not going to have details shared. And it also means that you don't have 5 parents of the same grade signing it in that particular school. So like I said, the pledge gauges our success, and the more we have, the more drive for other parents to sign. Our guiding principles are very simple. We put our children's well-being first. We want to prioritize children's mental and social and emotional well-being. This is what this whole movement is all about. But it relies on community collaboration. So that's one of our guiding principles. We believe in the power of collective action and collective accountability. We've got parents and educators and healthcare practitioners, psychologists, all on board with this, and they're really helping us to spread the word and create that legitimacy around this cause. We're also research backed. We have a ton of evidence that we can share with you. So don't feel like you have to take our word for it to say, this is not good for our children and it's got an impact. Everything we say has data to back us, and we can share that with you. We want to take a positive and a proactive approach. It's really important for us to say we are not an anti-tech movement. We believe in tech with purpose, but we do believe that smart and timely choices need to be made to protect our children. So often when we talk about Unplugged, people think we're, anti-tech. We don't want our children to have a computer. We don't, that is not what this movement is about. There is many opinions around screens and technology. And right now, the focus for Unplugged is simply to keep the smartphones away from children until the age of 14, because that is one massive baby step that can make a huge difference. We want to be supportive to all parents. We don't communicate with judgment, and we just want to encourage small lifestyle shifts for the betterment of children. So even if you have a child who's on a smartphone and they're under 14, it doesn't mean we want to support that. There are ways we can support that as well. And this is about a shared vision, right? It's about a vision of children who are thriving in the outdoors, making in-person connections, and just reclaiming some of that, connectedness that we grew up with. So how can you influence this change? This truly takes the village, like I've said. Please use your community, connect with your school PACs, use your social media platforms, as ironic as that may sound, and maybe even consider being a champion in your community. So we can't do this alone. We do need your help. And now I am going to stop my share, and I am going to hand the baton over to Tanya Johnson, who is going to delve into the details of, the impact that smartphones have on our kids. So Tanya, take it away.
Hey, welcome everyone. I'm so incredibly honored to be here with everybody today. As Josette said, I think part of really reconsidering when and how we're giving our children tech is about recreating the space for them to be children, to grow, to be curious, to delight in being outside, to finding joy in the most natural ways possible, through sledding, through skiing, through riding bikes, through playing with mixed age group friends in the neighborhood. More and more and more, we're seeing less and less and less of this happen with our children. And so I'm going to start off by reading something that Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook, and his wife Priscilla Chan wrote to their child, to their unborn child. This was their dream for their child. You will be busier when you're older, so I hope you take the time to smell all the flowers and put all the leaves you want in your bucket now. I hope you read your favorite Dr. Seuss books so many times you start inventing your own stories about the Vipera Vip. I hope you ride the carousel with Max until you've tamed every color horse. I hope you run as many laps around your living room and yard as you want. And then I hope you take lots of naps. I hope you're a great sleeper. And I hope even in your dreams, you can feel how much we love you. stop and think a minute about everything that's in there. There's connection, there is nature, there's joy, there's play, there's reading, there is sleep, all of the things that unfortunately become a little bit more tenable when our children are part of a different generation where social media and where phones block everything that happens for them. So this is a study done by Common Sense Media, one of my favorite media watchdogs out of the States, actually. And this particular research study is really, really interesting. They looked at 200 tweens and teens. They took their actual phones so that they could record their data. They knew that it was being recorded, but they looked at how they used those phones over a week. And instead of the beautiful, beautiful description of childhood that we just saw, this is what we found instead. On average, our tweens and teens spend 4.5 hours a day on smartphones. It's estimated that our teens are actually spending about 9 hours a day on screens. They check their smartphones on average about 51 times a day. Get this, they received 237 notifications a day and attended to 46 of those notifications. Snapchat and Discord sent the highest amount of notifications. The longest amount of time spent on any app is TikTok. Over half use their phone on school nights, with 68% saying that throughout their night of sleep, they picked up their phone at least once. Of 85 participants under 13, our babies, our little ones, 68% used TikTok, Snapchat, and Discord. 45% of our participants used adult-oriented sites like Pornhub, casino games, Reddit, and 4chan. It's nearly half. Over 2/3 of our kiddos said that they sometimes or often found it difficult to stop using technology, that they use technology to escape from sorrow or get relief from negative feelings, and they miss sleep due to being on their phone or the internet late at night. And so we have this whole generation of children growing up with these little experience blockers, as Jonathan Haidt so beautifully puts it, in their pockets. And I hear this from the children, the teens, the tweens that I see in clinic on a weekly basis, that they want their phones, they want to keep it close to them. It gives them those beautiful little shots of dopamine. They want to keep it close to them, but they also wish that it was never there in the first place. And I'm sure as all of the moms, dads, grandmas, aunties listening in tonight, that you probably have had the same experience as you scroll late at night going, oh, I wish I wouldn't do this. That's coming from an adult with a fully formed prefrontal cortex, which happens just under the age of 30 years old. That's when the brain stops developing. We continue to be able to shift and change it throughout our entire lifespan. But at around the age of 30, we see a significant slowing because that prefrontal cortex is largely formed. What about our children whose brains are still developing? How do they control those feelings? What about our teens? If we have a hard time, can we just imagine what's happening for our kids? Okay, so we're going to have a look at a couple of the neurological concerns, and then we're going to look at our 4 big concerns. So Tina Payne Brighton is one of my absolute favorites. She says, the experiences our kids have with us and in their world don't just influence their behaviors, but actually how their brains get wired. So we can think about the brain as an association machine. Neurons that fire together, wire together. The brain is absolutely fascinating. It's largely what we like to think of almost as a social organ. So it develops in conjunction to what's happening in a child's world. We see a massive burst of neural activity in a child's early years, before the age of 3. And then depending on what's happening in that child's world, where their attention is focused, where their stresses are, where they feel most competent, where they start to go, I can, those are the areas of the brain that begin to strengthen. And it's around the age of 7 or 8 that we see pruning happening. So those are basically the connections that aren't used. We start to see the brain really specialize. The next time that we see a massive burst of neural activity is in those tween years, right around the time that we see many of our tweens start to use social media. So we see this massive burst of neural activity in those tween years, and then quite quickly after that, we see pruning happening. You remember I said that pruning only happened at 7 or 8 in the childhood years? In those tween years, we see the burst of activity, and then we see pruning happen. So the teen years are a massive time of opportunity and vulnerability. The brain is opening up. There's all of this neural activity that goes, "Oh, what is possible out there?" And then there's also pruning. What we're not using gets pruned away. The teen years, the tween/teen years, are also when we see an influx of mental health issues for our children: anxiety, depression, schizophrenia. We start to see if a child is going to struggle with bipolar, we might start to see those massive swings. Part of this reasoning has to do with both genetic vulnerabilities and also experiential vulnerabilities. When our children are stressed, we see that pruning occurs at a far more rapid rate. And then when they start to go, "Oh, I don't feel good," and their stress increases, we see these loops. And what do? Right around this time, as I mentioned, most of our kids now have phones. Most of our kids have social media. And along with that social media, along with those phones, comes an increase in stress. They're sleeping less. They tend to do less of the things that make them well and happy. It's the same for our children. The brain grows beautifully with experiences like play, movement, experience. Without these things, we don't see those beautiful brains develop in the way that we need them to. What do we see instead? Instead, we see children who become fixated on their screens, who with every notification, with every opponent killed, they get a little burst of dopamine. Dopamine is what we experience when we shop, when we gamble, when we see a friend we haven't seen for a long time and we go, "Oh, this is so exciting." Dopamine itself is not bad. It's what drives us to repeat behaviors. Dopamine itself is not bad, but too much dopamine is bad. And over time, a child's dopaminergic pathways become overused. And they have to engage in more and more and more screen use to get that same feeling of, "Oh, I'm really enjoying this." And so what do we see? Our kids use screens for longer and longer and longer periods of time, which over a period of time wreaks havoc on their ability to control impulses, to self-regulate. This is a brain scan here from Cincinnati Children's Hospital. This shows the integrity of the white matter in the brain being compromised. This was from a teen or tween/teen who had overused technology. We know that higher screen time is correlated with lower expressive language, which is the ability to also rapidly name objects, and also compromises emergent literacy skills. Higher screen time is also associated with, as we see in the scan here, lower brain white matter integrity, which affects the organization of the brain, and also myelination. What that myelination does is it basically helps with the coating, which helps messages to travel around the brain. Teens who spend more than 7 hours a day on screen also exhibit thinning of the cortex. The cortex is absolutely critical for problem solving, perspective taking, and logical thinking. This is the part of the brain that our teachers love. This is where, again, we're able to sit down, we focus, we think about things, and this is also the part of the brain that is compromised. The adolescent brain cognitive development study that's mentioned there is absolutely fascinating. We're still getting data out of it. It's an emergent study, but there's so much interesting information coming out of that. So for anybody here who has read Jonathan Haidt's incredible book, The Anxious Generation, one of my absolute, probably my favorite read this year, you will know that he talks about the 4 foundational harms: social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction. We're going to look at each one of these together. Okay, so the first one, I want you to watch this. This is a classic psychology experiment. Let's have a look, and I want you to think about what actually happens here when we add phones to this experiment. Let's watch.
In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Yeah. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl. Oh, that one always breaks my heart a little bit. So when we think about it, when we look at that, we see a baby who's trying desperately to get mom's attention and tries different things until eventually she almost just gives up, the little baby. What's happening for our kiddos nowadays is that often they're being raised in a world where they never fully have anybody's attention. And unfortunately, it often starts at home too. Now, I want to be real for a minute and say, as a mama who's also very, very busy, there are absolutely times when we're distracted. But in order to really form those strong, connected relationships with our kids, and within those strong, connected relationships, that's how our children's neurological growth occurs optimally. They need to feel safe so that their brains can engage in the important work of childhood. But in order to create those secure relationships with our kids, we need to have a pattern of serve and return. So baby says, baby coos, and I go, ah, that's an adequate serve and return. My child is a little bit older and comes home and says, none of my friends played with me. Something really important here though, when I'm looking at my phone and I miss those initial cues of her coming up and kind of looking down and her shoulders hunching, and then she says, Mom, and I say, yeah, one sec, Mom, one sec, Mom, no one played with me at recess. I get the end of that serve from her, but it's not a full serve and return. And that's what's happening for many of our kids. So often when I see kids in clinic who are struggling with social media, with cell phone use, they'll say to me, Tanya, I feel like my entire world, my entire life, mom and dad have been consumed by their own tech. And now suddenly I'm being put into therapy, but look at the adults around me. So we have kids growing up in homes where there's distracted parenting. And then we have kids who are forming relationships with other kids which are not deep, meaningful relationships. More and more and more, the children I practice, the parents that I speak to through the Institute of Child Psychology are telling me that their children are struggling to form deep, meaningful relationships. They have no idea what it means to actually sit there and say to somebody, oh, I'm sorry, I really messed up. Or to sit quietly while they wait at a doctor's office. Or to be really, really, really vulnerable, courageous, or to take risks. When our kids go to the park and they play and they jump from monkey bar to monkey bar, that is inherent risk right there. That risk does something to the brain which helps the brain to grow. Our kids are growing up now in a world where everything is just kind of meh. Nothing feels deep and rooted. And since 2013, when smartphones started to explode onto the market in North America, we've seen an escalation of anxiety, depression, and behavioral issues. And even beyond that, we have a whole generation of children growing up who never really know themselves deeply, know what they love, know what it's like to be bored, know what it's like to wait. That age 10 to 14-year-old, as I mentioned earlier, is a highly, highly vulnerable time when it comes to mental health issues. That is a time specifically when we want to be watching our kids, when we want to be making sure that they're sleeping well, that they're eating well, that they're connected to aunties and uncles and friends, that they have something where they go, I love to, and I don't care what it is, I love to scrapbook, I love to play hockey, I love to go riding bikes with my friends. They need to have an I love to. This is who I am. I often find that the teens that I see in clinic who have had phones for many, many, many years don't have that thing. And they come to me when they're 13, 14, 15, and they say, Tanya, I don't know. I don't know where to begin at this point. The other thing that we see with our cell phones, particularly with social media, is that our kids are starting to take their leadership, what I call from horizontal leadership. So instead of looking to their parents, instead of looking to grandparents, instead of learning, they're starting to take their guidance from social media, from their peers. They're learning from their peers. They're looking to their peers for the answers instead of looking to their parents for the answers. And the inherent danger in this is that those relationships are shallow, they're conditional. All pure relationships are conditional. You cannot rest in conditional relationships. Our children need to be able to rest in our unconditional love, warmth, in our ability to put in limits and say, this is what our family stands for. These are our values. And these are the things that help to grow beautiful, strong brains, sleep, movement, play, close, connected relationships. Ruptures within relationships help us to grow. This is what our children need. Phones, social media, they can wait. But through this incredibly sensitive period for our children, let's let them rest. Let's give them back their childhood. As Dr. Cheng says, if kids get used to screens at an early age, the brain loses its ability to work for its dopamine. Why would you want to go outside to get your dopamine when you could just get it from a screen? I've mentioned already, and at the Institute of Child Psychology, I'm a registered play therapist as well, and so my whole passion was obviously play. We know that children explore and learn about their world through play. Play is the language of children. They need play with adults. They need play with peers. They need play with their siblings. They need play by themselves. They need to learn how to be bored, to be creative, to be curious. That is how they grow. And more and more and more, I'm seeing kids come into the play therapy room who don't know how to play anymore. They will show me Minecraft in the sand tray, but they don't know how to deeply play. And play is the essence of a child's soul. It's how they express themselves psychologically. So where do all of those thoughts and feelings go? They get pushed down until we start to see them later come out and manifest in physical and psychological difficulties. Time in nature too. Time in nature rests us. Time in nature calms our soul. Our children often are living in a world that is insane. They have ballet on Monday, karate on Tuesday, extra math on Wednesday. They've got tutoring on Thursday, and on Friday they have a play date. Saturday and Sunday it are parties. When our children's alarm system is constantly on frenetically, when they go, 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 there's no stopping. And then they flop into their bed and they look at their phone. We just saw that stat on how many of them are actually checking those phones tonight. They flop into that phone. When do those nervous systems ever rest? And as I spoke about how sensitive the brain is during those tween/teen years, one of the things that causes that excess pruning is stress. So we may go, actually, my kid is fine. You know, nobody in their family has passed away. We're comfortable at home. But that is not necessarily the stress I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the big T's, even though those are highly, highly significant. I'm also talking about the small T's. Day-to-day grind. Our children's nervous systems are never resting. And as we talk about sleep, think about what happens for you with your sleep when you go to bed with the phone next to you, with your life history, with your maturity, with your fully developed brain. Think about how hard it is to actually put that phone down. So many parents come into my practice and they say, Tanya, we said that we would not be those parents, that we would keep their phones out of their bedroom, that we would limit phone time, that we would keep on top of who they were connecting to on social media. We never thought that we would be here saying we've lost our child. Last week in clinic, I had a little child under 10 who had been asked for pictures that she should never have been asked for. And the parents said, when we gave this phone, it was for safety reasons. It was because her friends were getting phones. We never ever thought that we would be where we are today. High levels of screen use probably does not come as a surprise, equals issues with internalizing issues. So I am not good enough. We know the research is clear that when we have several months of subpar sleep, that we start to really struggle with stress, with anxiety, with externalizing issues, with behavioral issues, and then also with keeping up on our relationships, being able to be present, be connected in our relationships. When we don't sleep well, we are at a much higher risk for anxiety and depression. When we look at the research on toddlers, when they use touch screens, particularly close to bedtime, it interferes not only with sleep onset, sleep duration, and sleep quality, again at these pivotal times of brain development. We know that screens can delay bedtime because we're looking at that screen, and also truncate the amount of hours that we're sleeping. When we go to sleep, very often we'll see that kids will lay down and they may put their phone down, but what they've just viewed on that screen, not only the flashing images and the lights that have now woken up their whole system, but very often we also have the psychological arousal of what they've just seen. Oh my goodness, I can't believe what I just saw. Or, oh no, I can't believe that nobody liked my picture. Our children need to sleep. It's so interesting. I often will have clients come into clinic who will talk to me about anxiety or talk to me about depression or talk to me about behavioral issues. And I always like to come back to basics, because if we're not sleeping well, if we're not moving our body well, if we're not outside enough, it doesn't matter how much therapy you come for. It doesn't matter how wonderful I might be or might not be as a therapist. Those fundamental building blocks need to be in place in order for our children to thrive. What about the attentional issues? So we all know, and we probably here have all multitasked. We might even at some point have said, I'm a great multitasker. We know that multitasking is actually a myth. When we focus just on one task, the research is clear. We're able to process information better, we're able to encode information better, and we're also able to store that information better. The moment we have our phone and we are trying to do our homework at the same time, our information becomes divided, fragmented, the encoding becomes disrupted, and the quantity and quality of what we're actually taking in is compromised. So when our kids are learning, more and more I'm hearing that schools are getting phones out of schools, thank goodness. But when our kids are sitting at home, when they're listening to us, that attention is constantly fragmented and divided. And again, very often we're seeing that role modeled, unfortunately, in homes too. Really, our ability to help our children to focus may become one of the best gifts that we give them as parents, and it's also becoming a rare gift. As Dr. McGee says here, unless we are intentionally creating opportunities for focus, for delay of gratification, and for boredom, the portions of the brain that regulate these functions have the potential to show less robust and possibly even diminished function, which goes back to what I was saying earlier. What we focus on tends to grow. When that focus isn't there, we see compromised ability. Oh, screen addiction. This is a biggie. We've already mentioned dopamine. I love this. Probably we do a number of workshops at the Institute. This is one of my absolute favorites. It's a quick little one, and then we'll chat about it afterwards. Let's watch together.
One thing we don't talk about is that it's sort of hard to talk about this. Our minds have these kinds of backdoors. There's kind of, if you're human and you wake up and you open your eyes, there is a certain set of dimensions to your experience that can be manipulated. When I was a kid, I was a magician, and you learn all about these limits, you know, that short-term memory is about this long and there's different reaction times. And if you ask people certain questions in certain ways, you can control the answer. And this is just the structure of being human. To be human means that you are persuadable in every single moment. I mean, the thing about magic as an example is that magic works on everybody. Sleight of hand, right? It doesn't matter what language you speak. It doesn't matter how intelligent you are. It's not about what someone knows. It's about how your mind actually works. So knowing this, it turns out that there's this whole playbook of persuasive techniques that actually I learned when I was at the Stanford Persuasive Technology Lab, and that most people in Silicon Valley in the tech industry learned as ways of getting your attention. So one example is we are all vulnerable to social approval. We really care what other people think of us. So for example, you know, when you upload a new photo, a new profile photo of yourself on Facebook, that's a moment where our mind is very vulnerable to knowing what other people think of my new profile photo. And so when we get new likes on our profile photo, Facebook, knowing this, could actually message me and say, oh, you have new likes on your profile photo. And it knows that we'll be vulnerable to that moment because we all really care about when we're tagged in a photo or when we have a new profile photo. And the thing is that they control the dial. The technology companies control the dial for when and how long your profile photo shows up on other people's news feeds. So they can orchestrate it so that other people more often end up liking your profile photo over a delayed period of time, for example, so that you end up having to more frequently come back and see what the new likes are, right? And the problem is that they don't do this because they're evil. They do it because, again, they're in this race for our attention. And we should also ask, is that necessarily such a bad thing? If they're orchestrating it so that other people like my photo, I mean, that might feel good to me. But so we have to have a new conversation about, as these technology companies use these techniques, these vulnerabilities in our minds, when is that actually aligned and good for us? When is that ethical? When is that honest? When is that fair? And when is that dishonest and unfair? Because they're actually manipulating our minds in a way that doesn't add up to our spending our time well on the screen. Well, so another vulnerability in our mind is something called a variable schedule reward. And that's like a slot machine in Las Vegas. It turns out that slot machines make more money in the United States than baseball, movies, and theme parks combined. People become addicted to slot machines. I think it's 2 to 3 times faster than any other kind of gambling in a casino. So it's insane. And why is that? Because it's very simple. You just pull a lever, and sometimes you get a reward, you know, and sometimes you don't. And the more random it is, and the more variable it is, the more addictive it becomes. And the thing is that turns our phone into a slot machine, because every time we check our phone, we're playing the slot machine to see, what did I get, right? Every time that we check our email, we're playing the slot machine to see, what did I get? Did I get invited to an interview at Big Think, or did I just get another newsletter, right? Or if you're on a dating site like Tinder, and when you're swiping, each swipe is you're playing the slot machine to see, did I get a match? I'm playing the slot machine to see, did I get a match? And the problem is that this dynamic, these variable schedule rewards, or the slot machine mechanic, is so powerful that it's the best thing at addicting people and putting you in the zone. One of the original designers of the Facebook newsfeed told me that the thing that made the newsfeed work at the very, very, very beginning, back in 2006, was in part a hardware innovation. And I looked at her and I said, what do you mean? And she said it was actually the scroll wheel on a mouse. Because with the scroll wheel on a mouse, your hand never had to leave its resting position. You just scroll to see the next thing. And because before that, you had to click on the down button or move your mouse and drag the arrow down and scroll the page that way. When you can take your two fingers on a trackpad and do this, or you can just scroll on a scroll wheel, it just means your hand never has to leave its resting position, and it's more like a slot machine. You can just keep swiping and playing, just like in Vegas where there's the button right there. They actually changed it, in fact. It used to be a lever, and now it's just a button in Vegas because it found it's easier just to get people to see if they get a match this way. So how much on our phones, when we use our technology, Instagram is like a slot machine. What's going to come next on the feeds? Snapchat is a slot machine. Each time you see the red notifications and you don't know what's behind it, you're playing the slot machine when you click on it to see, what did I get, right? And so it's sprinkled all throughout these products because it's a very compelling way of getting people's attention.
It's frightening. And if someone had said to me, years ago, Tanya, would you put a highly addictive device in your child's pocket? Would you give them a slot machine? Would you, when your child was 9, would you open up the liquor cabinet and say, here you go, there you go, it's all open, here it is? I would say, obviously not. No, I want my child to be a child, to experience childhood, to grow, to learn, to love, to be curious. I don't want social media. I don't want a phone to stop all of those beautiful experiences. And I believe deeply that if we stand together as a community, we can do this together. Thank you.